What's up, marker heads? It's Karen from Art by Karen E. Haley, and today I'm bringing you the Coloring Transparent Materials with Copic's tutorial. This tutorial is going to be covering glass objects. This particular object I'm coloring is a baby food jar that is... it has water in it, and it also has a spoon in it, so you can see how a glass object looks when you're working with the form of a glass object, and what it looks like when you have water in that glass object, and also what things that are in water do when they're being distorted and things like that, if that makes any sense at all. Anyway, so this is a pretty in-depth tutorial. I really hope it's educational, and I look forward to seeing what you guys create when you work from the tutorial and apply it to your own artwork. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoy, and please let me know what you think. Alright, I'm going to begin sketching. So here is my reference picture. I'm going to be drawing the glass jar on the left with the yellow spoon, because I think that the contrast looks a little bit nicer, and it's giving me more information for me to use. So here I am, I'm going to be sketching the ellipse. I'm holding my pencil very far back. Some artists like to hold their pencil like this, some people like to hold their pencil like this, and some people hold it like writer's hand. And I feel like this, I used to draw like this. I used to sketch like this, but with ellipses, I found that holding my pencil really far back helps to keep it from getting too wobbly, because you're moving your whole arm in one motion. I'm going to leave a link in the description below to a tutorial that is not done by me, but it's a very useful and very helpful resource on how to draw glasses, like drinking glasses and cups and things like that, anything with ellipses, because they're hard for me to explain, and I'm not really here to teach you how to draw a cup. I'm trying to teach you how to color something made of glass. So I'm here really showing you how to finish up something like this, not how to start it. For glass objects such as jars, like the one I'm drawing here, what is most important is paying attention to the structure. So checking the jar's symmetrical aspects, making sure that things line up, making sure it doesn't lean to one side or the other. These are all really important things that you gotta keep in mind when you're drawing something, especially something made of glass, because when things are off, it kind of looks like it's melting and it can look really weird. Another thing that you want to practice, I think I may have mentioned this already, is to practice drawing ellipses. They're really important. When you know how to draw an ellipse correctly, it looks a lot more believable, and it also makes it just a lot easier for you to draw things like this. So when you're drawing something like water or glass, it's really important to consider distortion. So as you can see here, I'm drawing the spoon inside of the glass. And what I'm thinking about is how the planes on the glass turn. So we have the threads of the glass jar on the top, we have that little rim, it's kind of like the shoulders of the jar, and then the edges of the jar. And so all of these different planes are going to affect the image you're seeing through it, especially things in the object, but also things behind the object, like the background. Another factor that really affects distortion is water, especially if there's water inside of glass. What you're seeing inside that water is going to be affected a lot, especially, like, again, near the edges of the jar, there's going to be a lot of magnification going on, and it's almost going to look like the object itself has melted or conformed to the edges of the jar, because that water is really distorting the image to your eye. Okay, so what I'm thinking about next, and what you guys should be thinking about, is where the light is hitting this glass object. So the first thing you're going to want to do is think of where the light hits it on the exterior. Because glass is so reflective, your highlights are generally going to have pretty sharp edges. They're going to have really defined outlines, and it's going to be easy to see where they are. And that's probably going to be the easiest highlight for you to sketch, but you also have to think about the light that's coming through the jar and hitting the interior edges. Down near the bottom rim, a lot of the times there will be a highlight, and there will be a lot of light catching along that inner edge. One thing I want to mention here while I'm sketching is that later on when I do the coloring, I'm going to be adding in a background that's not the same as the background you see here. I'm using the jar, the light, the spoon, and all of that sort of thing, the shadow information. All of that stuff is going to be in the image, but I'm going to be changing the background so that you can see how to use a reference and take what you need, but also be able to put your own information into it based on what you see from the reference. So now that you're ready to color your sketch, you're going to want to make it clean. So what I did was I rolled my kneaded eraser into a log shape and rolled it across the drawing, and it helped to lighten the picture without erasing the lines completely. That way, it wouldn't have graphite on the paper that would be so dark that you would see it if you colored over with the markers. When you color over pencil lead with Copics, it does make it permanent, so you're really going to want to make your sketch clean and ready to go before you start laying down Copic marker ink. Otherwise, you're going to have a little bit of a messy drawing, and unless that's the look you're going for, it's really not a great thing to have happen in your pictures. Okay, now that you're ready for your outlines, you're going to want to think about what you're going to use. You can go with colored inks, which is what I like to do, or you can go with black outlines, or even go without. Personally, I like to use either colored ink or no lines at all for transparent objects, just because it really helps to give it a transparent look. So if you're going to go with colored inks the way I did, I selected pens that are going to have the same colors as the background, and my background is going to be blue and green, and I'm going to use yellow in there a little bit to show where the light sources are. So it's just all about personal preferences in a lot of ways, but it's also thinking about what colors you want to use and things like that, especially if you're going to use color. Otherwise, you can go lineless, and that looks really good, or you can give it the black outlines just to match the rest of your picture if that's what you like to do. It's all up to what you personally want to do. Okay, so the first thing you're going to do after you outline or decide to go lineless is you are going to color your background. Coloring your background first is going to save you a lot of time and guesswork when you go to color your transparent object itself. So for me, I decided to invent an idea for the background for this picture. So what I wanted to do was put it into a scene where the jar is out on a porch railing, and you can see bushes on one side, some sky in the middle, and then there is a building in the distance that you can see. And so in order to do that, in order to bring my imagined environment into this picture, I have to first look back at the reference itself. The real reference has information that you need to translate into everything in the background. So for instance, you're going to want to look at the light source, you're going to want to look at the perspective of the jar, and different things like that. Having those things all match up are going to really make your picture a lot more believable and look a lot more realistic, more grounded in reality. Otherwise, you might have perspective that's off and your jar will look like it should be falling off of the table or whatever it is that it's on. Just really keep in mind that using your reference can really save your butt in the long run. Okay, so it's going to take me a while to color in the background on this picture, so I do want to talk a little bit about references. I took a lot of reference pictures for this tutorial, and that's because there's so many different types of transparent objects out there that I can't teach you how to draw every single kind, but I can provide you with a visual library so you can look and observe and see how these things look when they're lit a certain way and what they do when you have different kinds of backgrounds behind them. And this is going to kind of lead me into my next topic here, and that would be whether it's right for an artist to use references or not. The misconception that I'm talking about is that people feel like artists who use references are being lazy, or they are cheating by taking the information from a photo and translating it to their own artwork, but honestly, that's just not true. The only reason you shouldn't use a reference is if it's not under Creative Commons, and a lot of pictures that you find online are going to be copyrighted. So if you are looking for references, you need to do some digging and find stuff that is available for all artists to use for free. So you can search for websites like Paint My Photo or Paint My Picture or whatever, and these places have a huge library of photographs that you can just use. For instance, I took a lot of pictures for this tutorial, and it's up there for you guys to use, because I want you to be able to learn from the photos I took. This is my main point, is that references are here for us to observe and learn from. I remember when I didn't use references before, I was just coming up with a thing out of my head, and it didn't look right at all, and I just hated it for some reason, and I didn't like the way that it looked, and it was because it didn't have any foundation in reality. I mean, I was drawing horses that had people knees on the back legs, for crying out loud. They just looked really bad because I was trying to draw something with no basis in reality. And that's the great thing about references, is that you can observe and translate this information even into your own style. You can work straight from the photo and make the most photorealistic piece possible. That's great. I mean, that's, if you like to work that way, that's really cool. I can't do that because it's really time consuming. And anyone who says that someone who does photorealism is lazy hasn't ever tried to exactly copy a photo before. And even if they're copying, they're still putting a lot of effort into it, and it still looks like a piece of artwork in the end. It doesn't look exactly like a photo. So, I mean, it's just really crazy to me to see a lot of people say, oh, they use a photo, it's so lazy, it's not creative at all. But it's just there for you to use, and you can learn from it. You can create something that looks just like it, whatever you want to do, but references are simply a resource that we should be taking more advantage of. As you color the jar, the first thing you're going to want to do is outline your reflecting light. There's going to be a lot of light bouncing around on this glass, so the best thing to do with that is to take a very light marker. Here I'm using G20, and I'm outlining the edges of the reflected light just so I know where not to color, and that's going to help me keep those shapes, those light shapes, from getting colored in. I then use the same marker to color in the areas where the background is going to be green, especially right there where that bush is going to be behind the jar. And then I'm just using it as a base for the darker greens that are going to go back in, and it's just really a map at this point letting me know where to color and where not to color. So the next color I'm bringing in is BG72, and I'm just laying in the base color that's going to be showing where that wall is behind the jar. I'm also making sure that I'm not keeping these background areas behind the jar very sharp. I'm making sure they have kind of undefined edges, because when you look through glass, it really distorts things, and it also takes a lot of the sharpness out of the images that are behind them. So I'm making sure that I keep things a little bit more loose than I did in the actual background that you don't see right behind the jar but around it. That way it really gives it a distinction and gives that glass a little bit more a solid look to it. And it just really helps the viewer pick that shape out. Okay, so when you color in the water, you're going to think about two things. First, the water is going to be reversing the image behind it. And so that means that while the bush is on the left side of the image, it's going to be on the right side of the jar when you have the water there. So you're going to color it green, but you're also going to think about how the light is coming into that jar and reflecting on that side. The light's coming from the front and slightly above, and so down in the back side of the jar, down near the bottom, there's going to be another secondary light hitting that, and that's why I'm coming in with a really light green and giving it a nice gradient towards the darker color. It's because there's some light catching down there, kind of like when you look into a marble. The light just kind of sits down there and makes everything a little bit brighter. And so that's something that's really interesting that I didn't really know before I looked at the references, so that's a really cool thing that I learned while I was working on this. Okay, now that I'm working on the spoon, I look back at my reference again and make sure that I nail down the way that the distortion is making the spoon look. And I'm also noticing that there is some form shadows on the spoon, so I colored the spoon with a layer of G01 YG01, and then I went over it with G21 to give it the form shadows, and that gives it the shape that it needs, that makes it look like a spoon. Otherwise it's just going to look like a flat object. And I'm also making sure that I put in the color that's curving around that edge of the jar, because the jar is reflecting that image and making it really stretched. So distortion is really important when you're working with glass and water objects, because it really helps to make the image look like it has some form to it. Okay, so now I'm moving on to the top surface of the water, and this area is going to be reflecting the plane below it, as well as grabbing the dark colors from around it. And what I mean is, there's the flat surface, of course, and that's facing the ground plane, but it's also got a meniscus line. And if you guys haven't taken freshman science yet, the meniscus is the line that the water forms as it touches the jar's edge. So what's happening with the meniscus is that it's curving against the edge of the jar, and that curve causes it to catch the dark colors from around it. And for instance here, it's catching that color of the wall that's behind the jar, and I'm getting that information from looking at the reference and seeing how there's a lot of dark contrast right around the edge of the water. So I already colored this part here, but the bottom edge of the cup or jar where it starts to curve, it also mimics the effect of the meniscus, but on a larger scale. So there's more contrast down there, because that little curve down there of that jar is picking up a lot of contrast as well. Thank you so much for watching, you guys. As you guys go ahead and check out the references I have up for you, please make sure that when you're working with them that you check them often. It's really important to look back at references, especially when you're trying to learn how to draw something new, to look back and pay a lot more attention to your reference than you do to your drawing, because you're going to be really studying that reference and seeing how things work. And even if you have the resources to, get some glass objects at home and maybe put some water in them, or take your hose outside and watch how the water pours out of that hose and just kind of really observe what real life is doing and try to translate that into your own artwork. Turn it into your own style if you want to. Make it your own and really take the opportunity to use your skills of observation to learn about things around you. I hope this was a helpful tutorial for you. I really enjoyed working on it. I do apologize for it being a month and a couple days late. It's been really hectic here on my end because I was finishing up school at the time, and I'm now out of school for the summer, so I'm having a lot more time to get things out and finished for you guys. So I'm really excited to finally get this tutorial out for you. Please let me know what you think. When I hit 25,000 subscribers, I will be doing another tutorial poll. I'll be giving myself a little more time next time so that it's not really confusing when you guys don't see the tutorial coming up. But at the same time, I really had a lot of fun working on this. I wanted to make it as good as possible for you guys because I want to start putting out really high quality content. And if that means taking a little more time, then that's fine with me. I hope that's fine with you guys as well. So please, I would love to see what you guys do with your learning from this tutorial. I would love to know if what I said really made any sense, and that way it'll help me really improve on my future tutorials. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you for giving this tutorial a try, and if it helped you in any way, hit a like, please subscribe if you haven't already, and anytime you want to suggest any ideas, I'm open to ideas, so it's really fun to know what you guys are interested in seeing.